Hello and welcome back. This is Susan Milner, also known as McCartney Green, and we are this morning going to start on chapter 24 on book number 1, A Healing in Jesus' Name. Let's get to it. See if I can do this without clearing my throat so much. I've got a cold that I cannot get over. Okay. Shelley kissed her boys goodbye, and Eric prayed over them before they sent them off to school Monday morning. For the next 4 weeks, Ricky or Bree would carry out the duty of getting the boys off to school and praying over them. This morning, once the kids were off, Eric and Shelley loaded the car and headed out. In only a few hours, they sped along a narrow, winding road high in the North Georgia mountains. The leaves of the trees made patterns of shadow across the road. Wildflowers bloomed in every treeless space. The air, cooler than Atlanta, smelled sweeter and of the earth. And as they came slowly around a curve, 2 deer sprinted up the side of the mountain. Oh, look, did you see? Shelley asked excitedly. Eric smiled at her. She looked like an angel in her white skirt and blouse, the sleeves billowing in the wind. It was the same outfit she'd worn after the second day of training when he'd taken her to dinner. I saw they have your eyes, he answered. They came upon a clearing covered with yellow daisies where a small wood cabin sat nestled between the trees. It was a simple box with a porch, but from the look of wonder on Shelley's face, you would think it was a castle. The moment Eric stopped the car, she jumped out, ran to the porch, and tried the door. It opened into something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. White, lacy curtains blew in the breeze. A wooden table, slightly grayed, sat to the right, a mason jar filled with dried flowers in the center. Along the wall on the right was an old-fashioned refrigerator, the kind with the rounded corners, and a single sink, and a small and very old gas stove. To the left of the front door was a large room with a fireplace, fronted by a tattered old braided rug. The rug was flanked by 2 rocking chairs and a giant overstuffed sofa. On the far wall, directly across from the front entrance, a door beckoned, and Shelley opened it and was reminded of a scene from Alice in Wonderland as she found herself standing in a small hallway with 3 doors. The door on the right contained a bedroom with twin beds, a dresser, and lamp. The center door opened into a bathroom from another century. A rusted porcelain sink was skirted by yellow gingham. The bathtub looked promising, a huge freestanding claw-footed deal sitting under the window. Outside the window, the entire clearing was covered in dandelions. Shelley sighed a contented sigh and left the bathroom to explore the door on the left. It was another bedroom, dominated by a giant 4-poster bed covered with a thin patchwork quilt. Heavenly. A night table with an antique lamp and a monstrous 8-drawer dresser with a mirror that was in desperate need of silvering were the only other furnishings. Looking up, she saw a thick wooden beam running along the ceiling. The entire cabin was rustic and serene. Delighted, she ran back out onto the porch, which Eric had piled high with their stock and luggage. She jumped onto his back and kissed his neck. Oh, thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for talking me into coming, because it's wonderful. I just love it. He pulled her down and frowned at her. You're welcome. But remember, this isn't a vacation. I'm going to work your butt off beginning right now. Now, she said with a pout. Now, he replied firmly. Help unload the boxes of supplies and unpack the luggage, then get the kitchen set up. Oh, Eric, can't we... She stopped. Eric stood with his hands on his hips and a scowl on his face. Okay, master, she added dryly. She worked rigorously for 2 hours, cleaning shelves and putting up supplies and sweeping floors and airing beds and scrubbing the bathroom and unpacking suitcases and trunks. At one point, Shelley stopped at the window to watch Eric where he worked in the yard, suspending a kicking bag from a branch of a large willow. Wearing only shorts, his golden skin shining in the sun, his hair blowing out across his back, and a sweatband around his forehead, he looked like a native warrior. He truly was a beautiful man. He pulled a deadly-looking hunting knife from a sheath at his hip and began sharpening it. She noticed he wore a leather strap that crossed one shoulder and met a belt at his hip with several tools and weapons attached. He replaced the knife on his hip, and Shelley turned away for a second, and when she looked out again, he was gone. Sighing, she went to the kitchen and made thick meat sandwiches and lemonade. She set the table with the ironstone dishes that had been in the cabinet and went out to find Eric, but he was nowhere in sight. She circled the cabin until she came in view of the front porch again, but still didn't see him. She did see, however, a lovely dirt path curving off through the woods, and her curiosity overcame her. Shelley wandered slowly down the path, smiling at squirrels as they scurried out of her way and picking wildflowers for the table. In the distance, she could hear the babbling of a mountain stream calling to her. Moving faster, she followed the path until it dead-ended at the bank of the stream. Immediately, Shelley slid her sandals off and stepped into the icy water. The cold water made her feet numb, but it didn't deter her. Gathering her skirt so she could see where to place her feet on the rocky bottom, she slowly crossed the shallow stream. On the opposite bank, she gazed up into the woods that seemed to go on forever. The sun shining through the trees offered a breathtaking view, and the strong aroma of pine had her breathing deep and smiling. She closed her eyes and sighed, experiencing the pure pleasure of being one with the earth. Hot metal touched her throat, and a strong arm wrapped around her waist. "Don't scream and don't move," a gruff voice ordered. Quickly, though, the knife was gone, replaced by warm lips. "I knew it was you," she proclaimed. "Oh, really? Is that why your legs are wet?" She turned to him. "Very funny. You left me alone." "Not hardly, sweetheart." "Oh." She frowned, and he smiled. "You're getting much stronger, Shelley," he offered. "Why do you say that?" "Because I can tell you truly weren't frightened just now. You didn't fall apart. You didn't even startle. I believe your inner strength is beginning to expand." She frowned because she didn't feel strong. "Well, maybe that's how you see it. Eric, but I see it differently, completely different. I just stood there. I didn't react. I didn't fight." She sighed. "Then again, I really did know it was you. Where were you?" "I was being a good ninja and becoming familiar with my environment, and you, on the other hand, were being a bad little girl by wandering off on your own." She turned and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm sorry, Master Kino. I was only looking for you." "Well, then you weren't doing it very well, because I was practically standing beside you the entire time. You know, Shell, your skills are not just for a tournament. They're for everything. Being a martial artist is a way of life. You need to work on letting your senses take over." Shelley shrugged. "Maybe my senses had taken over, and I knew you were nearby. Maybe that's why I felt so safe." Eric smiled. "You argue well, anyway." Together, they walked back to the cabin and ate lunch. Once settled, Eric took her on a 4-mile run through the woods. In a clearing, they stretched and improved her technique and practiced sparring moves. They ran the 4 miles back, and Shelley did 400 abdominals and 200 push-ups while Eric prepared an evening meal. And after dinner, Eric allowed Shelley to phone home to check on the boys before he resumed instruction. They worked hard into the evening, performing their Tai Chi and stretch with the setting sun. "Bath and bed," Eric commanded, "because tomorrow is going to be much harder." She could barely lift her tired, aching legs into the high tub. She eased down into the hot water and slowly rubbed her body with the sweet-smelling soap. And once clean, she slid down farther and allowed her eyes to close. "Shelley?" Eric called as he knocked on the bathroom door, and when she didn't answer, he opened the door a crack. "Shelley," he said louder this time. She gasped and sat straight up, the now cool water splashing over the side of the tub. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I must have fallen asleep." "You think?" She pulled on her robe and stepped out of the bathroom. "You know, that's a good way to drown," he teased. "I was using my mind power to make you come and take me to bed," she answered sleepily. He chuckled. "Well-spoken little warrior." He led her to the bed and prayed with her and tucked her in. She laid a hand on his arm as he turned to leave. "Eric, you know, we can share the bed. I promise, no hanky-panky." Smiling, he shook his head. "I'm not that strong. Stay focused on the mart. I'll stay on the couch. Good night, sweetheart." New scene. The rest of the days were the same. Hard work and dreamlike living occupied them. There were hundreds of paths through the woods which were explored at running speed. They roamed over the mountainside, teaching and learning and getting to know all the wonders and beauty of the earth that God created. Taking advantage of their privacy, they held hands and kissed and cuddled often in the woods, on a path, in a field of flowers, under the stars, on the porch. It was spring, and they were completely and totally in love. Ricky arrived with the boys on Thursday evening, and their little family couldn't be happier. And while Eric worked with Shelley over the weekend, Ricky taught survival skills to the boys, and while Shelley and Ricky sparred, Eric taught ninja skills to them. There were nature hikes and explorations and picnics, and they enjoyed themselves so much that come Sunday, it was hard for the boys to leave. It had also been hard on Shelley, but Eric worked her fiercely over the next 4 days so she wouldn't have time to think about it. The following Thursday night, Ricky and the boys arrived again, this time with Bree in tow. Eric allowed Shelley a small break from her rigid discipline. He helped her prepare a delicious meal of baked chicken and brown rice and steamed vegetables, and Shelley felt adventurous enough to make homemade biscuits as a special treat for her family. But they turned out flat and hard, and of course a little overdone, and she threw the pan down on the counter. "Damn, I give up. I just give up." Eric turned at her, cursing in front of the kids, and knew it wasn't because she'd burned the biscuits. He went to her and tilted her face up to the light. "You're tired, Shelley. You need to rest. Come sit down and don't worry about the biscuits." She hesitated, but he pulled on her arm and they sat down to eat. Ricky, however, made his way over to the pan, and he picked up a hard, round saucer. "Oh, hey, look, guys. Mom made us ninja weapons to use in our battle tomorrow." Shelley couldn't help but giggle, and Eric was also pleased with his son's ability to lighten up any situation. Ricky was always happy, always cheerful, and always making those around him smile. Bree watched Ricky's antics with admiration, too, her eyes following his every move. He was almost a carbon copy of his father, except Ricky was a bundle of laughs. She had also seen the serious side of him. She wondered if he was anything like any of the movie characters he'd portrayed, deadly when provoked. He was responsible enough to take excellent care of Mark and Joey, and a true professional when it came to his career. She was in awe of the gorgeous young man. She'd offered herself to him once, and he'd turned her down. She wondered if he still took that stance. Intending to find out, she looked forward to spending time with him on the picnic the family had planned for the next day. New scene. In the morning, after workouts and chores, everyone helped put together a picnic lunch packed into backpacks. Mark and Joey armed themselves with Shelley's biscuits, and the group started off on a hike. Eric and Shelley walked side by side, watching the children wander along the path in front of them, finding points of interest, throwing rocks, and stopping to wrestle with Ricky whenever the inclination struck. Bree watched them, totally charmed by the way Ricky interacted with her brothers. Eric felt Shelley's hand slip into his, and he lifted her fingers to his lips with a smile. Exploring a new area of the mountain, they came to a small path that forked off to the right. Mark and Joey ran ahead, around the curve and out of sight, while the adults stood and discussed which path they should take. Deciding to head a little farther up the mountain, Shelley called Mark and Joey to come back, but they didn't respond. She could hear them laughing and throwing rocks into the stream. Handing Eric her pack, she disappeared around the curve in search of the little ninjas. A few seconds later, a blood-curdling scream erupted from Shelley's lungs, striking fear in Eric's heart and draining all color from Ricky's face. It seemed to take them forever to travel the short distance around the bend to find the source of Shelley's trouble. Ricky, Bree, and Eric came to a halt where the path ended and stared in horror. A rope footbridge dangled precariously a good 30 feet above the water. Mark and Joey clung desperately to the wooden slats that had once formed the walking surface of the bridge. One of the top ropes of the bridge had torn free from one side, probably because of Shelley's added weight. Shelley now dangled from the rope that had previously formed one side of the bridge. Swinging helplessly below what was left of the bridge, she tried desperately to pull herself up in order to help Mark and Joey, who could slide off the boards at any time, but it seemed it was all she could do to hold on. Eric and Ricky swung into action, calling encouragement to Shelley and the boys as they worked. They pulled ropes from their packs and tied them together to make one long rope. Ricky grabbed one end and flew down the steep hill to the water's edge, crossed the stream, and ran up the other side. In the meantime, Shelley had inched her way up the rope, hand over hand, and reached for a wooden slat, but it was still too far. "Joey," she yelled from where she hung. "Baby, pretend the boards are part of a ladder and climb right up the ladder to the far side." Joey shook his head. "Come on, Joey, do this for Mommy, please," Shelley called as she struggled to hold on, the muscles in her arms growing weaker. Joey looked up toward the side that was his destination and began moving slowly upward. And only a minute later, he was stepping onto the path on the far side. "Oh, thank you," Shelley whispered. "Thank you." Ricky had also reached the far side and found a tree to secure his end of the rope. Eric had already accomplished the same. Joey turned and called to Mark. "Come on, Mark. It's easy." Mark started moving, but stopped when he was beside his mother and reached for her hand. "No," she screamed. "You go first, Mark. Go." "I don't want to leave you, Mom," he cried. "Please, Mark," Shelley said weakly, her arms trembling with the strain. "Please, baby, climb up." Eric's voice came calmly to them. "Mark, I can't help your mom until you're safe on the other side. Move, now, and don't stop," he commanded firmly. It seemed to do the trick. Mark started up toward the top. Ricky was almost to Shelley, coming hand over hand toward her on the rope he and his father had rigged. It appeared the rescue would work until they noticed the boulder. It was resting on the edge of the far side. One end of the bridge seemed to run right up under the huge rock, and the rock was teetering as if it had a mind of its own. The bridge lurched with the boulder's weight, and Mark and Shelley screamed as Mark lost his footing. Ricky lowered his legs down toward them, but the boulder shifted again, and Mark fell toward Shelley. Instinctively, she reached out and grabbed Mark's arm. With the added weight, she couldn't hold on, and the next few seconds seemed to happen in slow motion. Mark and Shelley falling through the air and the boulder toppling over, taking the bridge with it. Bree and Joey screamed. Eric and Ricky watched in horror, realizing the large rock could crush them. The screams echoed through the peaceful forest as Shelley and Mark hit the shallow water below. The huge rock rolled towards Shelley, where she struggled to right herself, but she refused to let go of Mark. She couldn't get out of the way fast enough, and the huge rock settled right on top of her. Eric flew down the hill toward mother and son, while Ricky made his way back to land. Shelley still held Mark's arm as he bobbed unconscious in the water, and she called out to Eric, "I'm okay. Help Mark. Oh, God, please help Mark," she cried. Eric didn't know how she could be okay, but showing his trust in her, he did as she bid. Gently pulling Mark from the water, he carried him to the bank as Ricky joined him, Joey in tow. Eric knelt beside Mark to check him out. He looked up at Ricky. "He's not breathing, but we have a pulse." He began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. With only a few seconds, Mark coughed and drew in a gulp of air. Now that he was conscious, the pain caught up to him and he cried out. "His arm is broken," Eric said. "Bree, don't move him, but keep him warm. I have to get your mom out of the water." Eric took Joey to find the tablecloth in one of the... No, Eric told Joey to find the tablecloth in one of the packs and use it to cover Mark. He and Ricky turned their attention to Shelley as Bree and Joey looked after Mark. At first glance, it appeared Shelley had been crushed by the boulder, yet miraculously, Shelley's torso lay on the stream's rocky bottom, surrounded by several smaller rocks that were supporting the weight of the boulder. Only her midsection was held captive. She was able to keep her head above water fairly easily, even though Eric knew her neck and stomach muscles would tire soon enough. He placed his hand under her head to ease the strain on her neck, and she was crying. "Is Mark okay?" she sobbed. "He's fine. His arm is broken, but he'll be okay. Don't worry, Shelley. We'll have you out in a minute." The two men placed their shoulders against the offending monster and applied every ounce of strength that they could muster. It shifted, causing Shelley to cry out, and they stopped pushing. Eric frowned. They'd put all their strength into it and barely made it move. No way are they going to be able to simply lift it up off of Shelley. They're going to need help. Earlier, when they'd first arrived and realized their cell phones didn't work up in the remote area, Eric had thought it was a good thing. No longer. He motioned to Bree and spoke, trying to keep any hint of alarm from his voice. "Bree, can you find your way back to the cabin?" She nodded through her tears. "Run as fast as you can go, Bree, and use the landline to call for an emergency rescue. Then bring a car back with you. Hurry now." Bree took off. While Ricky comforted the boys, Eric spoke calmly to Shelley. "Hang in there, sweetie." Eric comforted as he held her head up and wiped water from her face. The icy cold water had her shivering violently, but she forced a smile. Ricky, see if you can find a sturdy branch to use as a lever. Ricky immediately obeyed his father. Shelley, I'll be right back, he assured her. So sorry. Eric left Shelley and climbed up the far bank to retrieve the rope. He came back down and climbed the other side to untie his end of the rope. He checked again on Mark, who was sitting up now, and then went back to Shelley's side. Squeezing her hand, he tried to offer her his warmth. She closed her eyes and tried to absorb it. A few minutes later, Bree came back with the car and a blanket, which she placed gently under and around Mark's shoulders. Ricky came down the bank bearing a large branch. He and Eric tried to place it somewhere under the boulder, but Shelley cried out each time they tried to wedge it between her and the rock. Finally, despite the pain it caused Shelley, they had it placed and they tried again to move the boulder. It budged, ever so slightly, just before the branch snapped with a resounding crack. Ricky went to find a stronger branch while Eric began tying the rope to the bumper of the car. He turned when Shelley cried out his name, and he ran to her side. Eric, I'm sinking. The rock, it's settling, and it's pushing me farther down. The fear in her eyes tore at Eric's heart. He went under the cold water again to assess the situation. The situation was both miraculous and terrifying. The miracle was that somehow the boulder had not crushed Shelley, but instead rested on a circle of smaller rocks. The terrifying part was those smaller rocks were sinking gradually into the bottom. There was almost no space now between the river bottom, Shelley, and the rock that was the ceiling to her jail. He came up. Don't worry, baby. It won't be long now, he said, realizing he was trying to convince himself as well. He started back to finish securing the rope. Eric, she called again. He turned back to her. Her eyes burned into his so he'd understand that what she was about to say was extremely important. Remember I once told you that I'm very claustrophobic? Not just a little, Eric. Very. You have to get me out because I'm about to freak out. I can't go under. Don't let me go under. It's taking everything I have right now just to keep from screaming. He held her face and kissed her forehead. He had no time to help her work through the claustrophobia. I want you to try to focus on breathing and stay calm. You know how to do that. You can do it. He hurried away, instructing Bree to help her mom hold her head up. Eric finished up at the car, eased the rope around a smooth tree, then down to the rock. He attached the rope to an empty backpack that would serve as a makeshift cradle for the rock. And Shelley gasped as the rock shifted again, and Bree cried, She's sinking! Please, Eric, don't let me go under, please, Shelley screamed. Eric spoke calmly and quietly to Bree. Find me something to use as a tube, something in our lunch supply, something plastic, so that if she goes down any further, she'll still be able to breathe. Mark and Joey began to cry, and Ricky came back with 2 sturdy branches. Eric spoke to him in Mandarin, and Ricky looked over at Shelley, worry in his eyes. They worked quickly, attaching the cradle to the boulder and running the rope back up and over a tree branch for leverage, then back to the car. It took several minutes to find a space to place the tree branches Ricky had found under the boulder so that as the car pulled the rock off of Shelley, they would guide it and keep it from crushing her. Bree came back with a plastic 2-liter soft drink bottle, which she'd emptied, and Ricky took his gold knife and cut off the bottom, and Eric took the makeshift snorkel to Shelley and knelt down beside her. Shelley, now, I need you to stay calm and listen to me. If you go under, you can still breathe with this. She shook her head madly. No, she pleaded. Don't let me go under, please. I can't. He looked into her eyes and smiled. You can. I know you can. You always come through. Just keep this end in your mouth and breathe calmly, slowly, in and out. Tears were flowing down her face. Eric, I'm afraid. I know, sweetie, but it won't be much longer. She was shivering violently, and Eric worried now about hypothermia. Where is the rescue team, he wondered. How long would it take them to find this remote place? Bree, when you called, did they give you an ETA? Yes, they said they would have to send a chopper, and it would be 30 minutes or more. His jaw clenched. Get in the car, and on my signal, I want you to pull off very slowly. Eric looked over the contraption that they'd rigged. It resembled a huge slingshot, loaded with a solitary giant rock. Ricky manned the branch that would keep the boulder from crushing her as it moved. "Shelley," Eric said as he smoothed some hair from her face. It was something he did habitually, something not hardly important enough to worry about at the moment, yet it seemed vitally important to remove the wet strands of hair from her cheeks. "Shelley, the rock will probably scrape across your stomach as we move it, and it may hurt a little, but don't let that scare you." He took a breath and signaled Bree. Slowly, she accelerated the car as he pushed his own weight against the giant rock. And gradually, it began to move. Shelley whimpered as the rock raked skin from her abdomen. The rock moved slightly, and Ricky quickly pushed the branch farther under to help brace it, and he and Eric used their strength to guide the boulder. Mark and Joey's crying came to a halt as they watched and became hopeful that any minute their mother would be free. But in a split second, their hopes shattered. The rope snapped under the strain, the branch broke again, and the monstrous rock settled back onto Shelley. Shelley cried out in pain as it came to rest on her chest. Joey jumped up screaming, "Mom, please, please, Mom, come out now." He cried as if she'd been playing a game with him that was no longer fun, and he had no wish to play any longer. Shelley closed her eyes. She couldn't bear to hear him cry. Bree came running back down the bank as Eric was checking Shelley out. Ricky had been quick enough to wedge the broken stub of the branch under the rock to keep it from crushing her, but it now pressed tightly against her chest. She'd moved down a little farther into the water to the point that the rushing current splashed over her face every few seconds, making breathing difficult. Eric lifted her head as she coughed and sputtered, and he placed the impromptu breathing apparatus in her mouth and stroked her cheek, trying to calm her. "Breathe, Shelley. Look, honey, you're not even under the water. I'm holding you up. I just want you to practice. Breathe through your mouth. Breathe. Atta girl." Bree and Ricky tried to comfort the hysterical boys, yet Bree herself was beginning to panic. "Oh, Ricky, what are we going to do?" she asked. Ricky kept his facial features neutral, showing no emotion, giving no hint of his own apprehension. He turned to Eric and spoke Mandarin, and Eric answered him. Ricky gave Bree her answer calmly. "Dad says that he's afraid of trying anything else without the proper equipment. The rock is already solidly against her chest, and she can't breathe very well. So we'll have to wait for the rescue team. Hopefully, they'll be here any minute." Bree looked at her mom and back at Ricky. You're trying to protect me. You're worried, aren't you?" He couldn't lie to her. He nodded his head, his eyes solemn. "Yes, I'm worried." Bree raised her chin, squared her shoulders, and went to her mother's side. Kneeling in the water, she pressed her forehead against Shelley's. "Don't worry, Mom. Don't you worry. The rescue team is on the way." Shelley's floating hand reached for her. "Stay with Mark and Joey. Try to help them not be afraid. Bree, I love you, baby girl. And tell the boys how much I love them." Eyes brimming with tears, Bree squeezed her hand. "I love you too, Mom. We love you. It won't be much longer." She forced a smile and rose to go comfort her little brothers. Shelley looked up into Eric's strong face. "I love you." His face darkened. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me." At that moment, the boulder settled again as one of the smaller rocks that braced it toppled. Shelley's head went under, her hands and feet reaching out in startled reflex. Joey and Mark both screamed again, and Bree put her arms around them as Eric quickly placed the end of the bottle back into Shelley's mouth and stroked her cheek like before. "Come on now, sweetie," he said loudly so that she could hear him over the rushing of the water. "You're going to be fine. Just don't panic. Stay calm. Breathe slowly in and out." I'm so sorry. She stared up at him through a few inches of water, eyes wide as saucers. Her hands reached up and gripped the beast that held her down. Bree huddled together with the boys as they sobbed. And now, the hypothermia was causing other issues. Shelley's teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't keep the makeshift tube in her mouth. Eric tried to hold her lips around it, but the water kept trickling in, and she sputtered, splaying the water in her mouth back up into the breathing chamber. Laying on her back, she had no way to clear her lungs, and she strangled on the small amounts of water that seeped in. Ricky finally broke. Damn it! Where is the rescue team? Joey ran to Ricky. Ricky, please don't let Mom die. Please get her out. Please, Ricky. Ricky held him and looked over at his father helplessly, and Eric could think of no comforting words. Shelley was struggling to breathe, struggling to stay calm, struggling to live. Ricky lifted Joey and held him close. Shelley sunk another inch and let go of the bottle. Eric grabbed it before the swift current took it away, and he went under. He did his best to suck the water out of her mouth and replace the bottle. Some air was getting through, but her breathing had slowed and become shallow. And between the rock pressed against her chest and the water she'd already taken in, there wasn't much lung capacity left. Eric peered down at her and into her eyes. There was so much fear. He looked over at Ricky, Bree, and the boys holding each other and praying for a miracle. And he closed his eyes. Jesus, please don't let this happen, he screamed silently. He then caught himself, realizing the error in his thinking. A wise soul had once reminded him that Alexander Graham Bell did not contemplate non-communication, and nor did the Wright brothers contemplate staying on the ground. He changed his thinking. How can we get out of this, Lord? He asked instead. She will live. He began to pray and immediately had a vision of the boulder lifting off of her. He kept that vision in his mind, and it made the boulder look small. Shelley could no longer hold the tube with her mouth, and she let it go. It floated silently away. The children became hysterical again. Eric took a breath, went under the water, and forced air into Shelley's mouth. Ricky scrambled to the opposite side of the rock and began digging, hoping he could cause the rock to roll toward him. If the rock had been flat, it wouldn't be possible. It was fat and round, and he should be able to make it roll. It moved slightly toward him, but it also settled harder onto Shelley. Shelley had been opening and closing her eyes, alternating between looking at Eric and stopping the sting of the water. Eric looked into the beautiful brown eyes that he loved, and the fear was gone, but it was replaced with something worse. Resolution. He went under to breathe into her mouth, but she didn't take it. She wouldn't take it. Eyes wide, she flailed her hands at the boulder, punching it, pounding it, trying to move it herself, and then, as if suddenly accepting her fate, she looked up at Eric once more before her body went limp. Her arms and legs moved gently with the current. Her eyes stopped closing against the sting of the water. No, please, Mark and Joey screamed. This cannot be happening, Ricky murmured, his face white with shock. Dear Father, please. Eric stood, unable to control his frustration. No, he screamed. Please, dear God, do not let this happen, he yelled, his voice echoing through the trees. And he heard an immediate answer. Don't give up. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. And that is the end of chapter 24. Cliffhanger.